Davis, your class went from 55% mastery to 84%, Bloomie 29 to 64, and Belmonte 30 to 60%. So I want you to just think for a moment, what teacher actions did you take in order to help your students reach this goal?
Lots of hands-on with this one.
With showing the numbers in alternate forms, we use base pen blocks a lot with that.
That's really good. Building it, drawing it, you build it, then you draw it, so you've got that absolute concrete, then we're kind of pulling back, but just again and again and again.
So I think that's really good for you guys to point out that you went from, they responded positively from going from concrete to the abstract. And that you made some clear teacher decisions on really focusing on your vocabulary. So there were some clear decisions that you made around your vocabulary as well. All right, so today we want to dive into NVT 1 and the following assessment items in order to grow our proficiency and reach our 80% goal. So
How to count accurately, forwards and backwards, even by ones. I have a few that are struggling forwards and backwards when they're going into the next hundreds or even the next tens.
You rearrange those digits to make a greater or lesser number.
It's not as math related, but it's reading the word problems carefully, which is some of the error that's why we're 84%, because we redid a few of those types of problems and they were able to do them without a problem. It was just making sure you're reading this carefully.
I want to press on that a little bit. So reading carefully or even applying a word problem solving strategy.
When you talked about some of the things you did, you talked about the concrete that you used, and then to move them to the visual representation when they write. So that was something you had them showing for you. So using your manipulatives. To represent your hundreds, tens, and ones. And then so that they know how to represent that in a pictorial way and on their paper. So recording with a box, and then your sticks and your ones. So on the right pictorial representation. You rearranging the digits, but then that top level of understanding is that they can go from 700 610s to 01s to understanding that that's also 76 tens. So remember, we always talk about that at that highest level of understanding, so they can exchange the values.
The problem that a lot of your students were having a really hard time with. So I want you to take 1 to 2 minutes to review this word problem. And we're actually going to build the example.
All right, so now that you've had some time to think through what our exemplar should look like, can you share with me?
I've done a couple of things in the class where I've either drawn 5 circles and put the number 10 within them. And then just 4 small circles next to it. And then I've also shown them just adding as an equation, so just doing 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 4.
Draw for a 10, we got the 5 rods, and then the 4 ones.
For me, I just drew 5 boxes similar to what Miss Davis did with the 10 inside of them, but then underneath them I wrote 10, 20, 30, so that
You
you
did
showing
the
your skip
continuous
counting.
counting.
Yeah.
So you you added this part.
So now that you've actually worked through your exemplar, is there anything you would like to add to our chart of our unpacked standard? Is there anything that you represented here that we do not have over there?
I did write skip counting forward and backwards within the place, So like being able to add on that 10 every time and knowing not to change the.
So would that be in addition
Yeah, I
to
think
this?
that would go right in with
So
that,
skip counting by tens?
Take 1 minute to just look at your student exemplar and how does your student exemplar for your highest work compare to your teacher exemplar? And is there a gap?
So for me, my highest students, that answered that question correctly, they were able to do that skip counting in their head. They didn't draw any sort of picture out. And I did notice one of them, he was able to skip count up to the 50 in his head, but he left off the 4 ones because he didn't draw the picture to represent. So I know in my reteaching, that'll be something I really work on, is making sure we're representing that, that equation.
Counting, labeling everything before they count it to make sure it's all there.
So I think that is really a good one. We add that to our, is there anything else that we wanna lift out? Cause I definitely think we wanna add that one to our chart. So with each of the sticks, they labeled each of the
Yeah.
sticks.
Did they label them by tens, or did they
Mhm.
skip count
10.
with them?
10, 20,
Okay, so
and then on the ones, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Lifted out one, which was, they didn't show their work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a gap, that was a clear gap with some of the kids, they just wrote the answer but did not show their work.
Ms. Davis, did you see anything different that with some of your
A
students?
couple of them decided to go for some multiplication, so they wrote 5 times 10 equals 50, and then 50 plus 4 equals 54.
5 groups of 10, so 5 times 10 plus 4. So they actually wrote the equation in that way.
I'll put that in blue since that's above what we expect.
Yeah. To the sample of your mastery and partial mastery student work that you've already identified. I want you to take 2 minutes to look at their work. What are the key gaps between the rest of our student work and the actual exemplar? And what was that actual error? It's a lot of the students.
So for some reason, they were focusing on, they have 5 groups,
Mhm.
but they have 2 in each group, which I'm not clear how they determined 2 in each group. And there were 2
Did
of
they even
those.
do the ones?
Well, here are the ones here.
Oh,
So they have the one, I'm not sure,
And what was their final answer?
14.
So they counted their dots. So there's some misunderstanding of how many should be in those groups.
Yes.
well, so they did 5 groups and they divided 10 marbles into 5 groups.
Oh, okay.
That's,
You're right. That's
Yeah.
what they did. They did
yeah,
division.
That's interesting.
well, they're good to go in division now.
Some of them, they realized that there were 5 groups of 10 and they could skip count that, but then it was like this student had, it's like he had a really hard time figuring out how to write that after he got it all together. And then just like she said, 540 or 504, just, reversing those digits around.
So, but just using the language from our chart, what are our key misconceptions?
It's kind of two, I was gonna say pictorial and then turning it into the standard form.
So we really didn't write that on here anywhere, knowing the standard form.
Right.
Okay, so let's lock in with our key conceptual misunderstanding, or our conceptual gap, and our procedural gap.
About the concept. So, understanding that the digits in the problem are represented by the tens or the hundreds or the ones. So understanding what those digits are telling us.
I know my class, we need to work on the 3R strategy.
Yes, that would definitely be procedural. Capture our conceptual and our procedural gaps. And I think for the most part, your students were following the procedural. You do have a few, but you were saying when you saw those hundreds in there that it's more of a conceptual gap, but most of ours were in the procedural gap.
So for today, why don't we focus on the procedural gap, because I feel like that's where most of your students fell, is that procedural gap.
I would say first would be able to translate the picture form to the standard form.
I think, that's perfect, I think that's where we should lock in. So let's lock in there, and so if we're locking in there, and just to make sure that we're all clear what that means, it's basically students will represent a 10 using a stick and a 1 using a circle. And since we wanna add on that continuous count, that we're not gonna list, that's how we're going to list it, so that's our exemplar. Alright, so now once you take your test papers, I want you to take a look closely at that question and how students responded. I want you to list your students' names that you will need to pull for reteach, based on how they responded to that NBT1 question. So take 2 minutes to just thumb through your test and list the students' names who made that error. Now that we've gone through and we've identified our students, we've identified our gaps, let's select our reteach structure. I want you to think of which reteach structure we should use, modeling or guided discourse, and tell me why.
So for me, I'll probably start